Hello, this is Daniel from Sound Headquarters. In today's long format episode, I'm going to be showing you the progress that we have been doing on this really cool home studio build. We're doing full-blown acoustic slat walls, as you can see here, with LED lighting and doing a bunch of cool details for the ceilings and the vocal booth and the front wall. This is part one. This is about 26 minutes of footage of us working to complete from scratch to where we're at right now. And let's take you along for the journey. So here is the room. This is the baseline room where we started from. You can see the construction that they did there, the double walls with the sauna pan and the 5/8 drywall. And here is the room. So this will be our starting point. And there's the little vocal booth there. And very cool spot. Really excited to show you everything we did here. So the first thing that we're doing is we're going to get started on our framing. Now the framing for these acoustic walls is going to be made out of 2x2, the same lumber that I use to make my acoustic panels. And the important part here is to just get all of our measurements straight and where they need to be, all of our final dimensions, so that we know where our wood is going to finish, where our frame is going to finish, where our wood trim is going to finish. So this all takes place at the planning stage with the client, and we went through all of our options and decided upon these acoustic slat walls. So right here, I'm just getting a nail in the wall, or a screw rather, to help me hold the very first piece of the frame. And I have the laser level set up here just to make sure that all of our lines are nice and straight and level across the room. And that right side wall there, the total length of this acoustic wall is about 12 feet. So about 1.5 pieces of our 8-foot long 2x2 board. And I left space at the top beneath that little bulkhead there for a piece of 1x4 for trim, which you'll see later on in this episode. But it's important that we get all of our measurements correct and all of our pre-planning done at this stage, because this kind of sets the entire basis for which everything is going to be built upon. And the final clearances are really important. So it's important that we take our time and measure everything properly. So there's the first side framed out, and now we're going to get started on the left side wall. This wall will be reaching all the way to the floor. And the other wall there, he has his water shut-off valve at the bottom right corner of that right wall, so we left that open for him. But on this side wall, there is no obstructions and there's no outlet there. So we're able to go completely from the bottom of the bulkhead there all the way down to the floor. So you can see that frame is all done. And now I'm getting started on the framing for this. We're going to be doing a corner base trap here along the entire length of this bulkhead. So I'm just getting a piece of my trim and a piece of the framing material mocked up so that I can repeat my cuts, which I'm doing right there, and that there's going to be enough room. There's about 3/4 of an inch of space from the bottom of the bulkhead there to accept that 1x4 piece of trim, which you'll see later on in the episode. All of this measuring and test fitting, it's super important so that we achieve the final fit that we are looking for at the end of the build. And you'll see how this all comes together later on in the episode. So this is about a 14-foot span, so I'm doing 2 sections here of the framing. And then I'll have pieces that go in between, horizontally between these sections. But this is just to set the whole framework for all of the framing for the main walls and base trap here, and so that I have somewhere to route all of our electrical for the lighting. Because that left side wall does not have an electrical outlet, we have to run the power from the right side wall up through the wall into the base trap and across all the way into the left side wall, where we'll distribute the power to the left wall and to the right wall. There's the vocal booth there. And getting started on the framing for the vocal booth right now. So the vocal booth is going to have the acoustic slat wall as well, but no lighting. We're going to be doing fiber optic ceiling lighting in an acoustic cloud, and that will be in part 2. So stay tuned for that. And yes, there will be the acoustic slat wall floor to ceiling in the vocal booth. This turned out super cool. I'm really happy with the result on this. And just getting the framing set up in there as well. And you can see our conduit that the client had run for his HDMI cables and his power and his microphone cables to go from the control room to the vocal booth. And there's the frame. You can see floor to ceiling. And this is all just with 2x2 lumber. And you can see I left the corners so that it's accessible from both sides. So I have something to staple the fabric into and something to nail the trim into on both sides of those interior corners. And there you go. You can see the finished framing. So now I need to make a middle brace for this left side wall. Since the fabric is only 58 inches wide, I can't stretch from the floor to ceiling with this fabric. I can only do about 58-inch sections, so I had to cut this one in half. So that just means that one of our acoustic slats will have to mount on that vertical brace section to hide those staple marks, which you'll see later in the episode. But this is just some pre-planning that we have to do here to make sure that our final product looks the way that we want it to. So you can see I've begun adding some of the Rockwool Comfort Board 80 insulation into the wall where I don't need any electrical access. But right now you can see that we're about to get started on the routing for the electrical. So the very first thing is I need distribution for the actual power from the wall outlet right there into the first right side wall. So I'm just using a hole saw there just to give me a channel to run this power cord through. And I used a 90-degree power cord just so that it's nice and as close to the wall tucked in as we can. So you can see I ran the electrical all along the framing, and I'll show you close-ups of how I distributed this power, but essentially it's just extension cords running from both sides there. I ran a conduit there, not necessarily just for protection, which it's kind of redundant because we had to cut it anyways, and there's a break in the cable there where we had to plug in another extender, but it does act as a place for us to stuff the insulation when we go to upholster this bass trap. But you can see there I had to chisel out some of the drywall to accept the power plugs for the LED lights there, and just running across, making all my notches in the frame. And this is so that all of the power and the lights, all the distribution can be behind the wall. That way our finished product is nice and seamless. There's no wires exposed anywhere. So you can see I kept all my wiring tucked in on that right side there. And now I can start adding the acoustic insulation to the walls before we get started on the upholstery. So this, once again, is Rockwool Comfort Board 80 and just cuts to size and just fits right in the frame. And here you can see I'm just stretching out the fabric, getting it stapled on. I'm just using a pneumatic stapler. You can use a handheld stapler as well. And I'm using 1/4-inch staples and then just trimming off the excess fabric and making sure that I leave that little space open so that I can still access the electrical, because we'll have to be test fitting and running those LED light strips, as you'll see in the episode. So just getting the left side wall upholstered as well. You can see we have that that connection in the middle there where the staples will be, but that will be covered by one of the acoustic slats. So you can see here I am just plugging in the LED strips, and this is just a test trial just to make sure that we didn't shoot a nail through any wires and that everything is going to work. And you can see there's all my notches there to distribute the LED to the top and bottom of the wall. And this will all make more sense as you continue watching the episode. You'll see how we distributed this lighting across the tops and bottoms of these walls here. So we got everything mocked up and plugged in, and I'm just going to plug into the extension cord here just to test that all the LEDs work. And yes, they do. Big relief. And now we can get started on all the prep work for the acoustic slats. So for all of these slats, we used Pine Select 1x2x8, and we used hundreds of these for this build. Every single one of them was sanded, stained, and clear coated by hand. I will spare you guys watching the hours and hours of footage of that, but essentially it was just sanding to make sanding with 120 grit just to make sure that the stain went in nicely and consistently. One coat of stain, we did like a nice dark walnut, and then one coat of a polyurethane clear coat, just to give a bit of like a satin finish. So you can see there's that varnish, the water-based varnish that we used in satin. And once we applied that with the brush, gave a really nice rich look to these boards, to these acoustic slats. It's a really nice look in person, and you'll see on the close-ups at the end of this video. Just has that really nice rich wood grain kind of look, and especially contrasting with the black fabric. It was a really nice final product for this client here. So I'm just getting started on getting these slats cut to size for the right wall, because these slats need to be installed before we can install the light track and before we can start installing the lights and finalize the upholstery. We have to get started on these slats. You can see I made a spacer there, a 1-inch spacer. That's the spacing that we decided on with this client. And I got all of these pieces cut to size. And then I have that middle bracing, so I can nail at the top frame, the bottom of the frame, and then the middle bracing allows me that left to right adjustability before I nail it in with our 18 gauge brad nailer. And then just making sure that all of the slats are nice and level before I nail them in, and that I'm using my spacer in between each slat to make sure we have consistent gaps all the way around. So now I'm just going to get started on the left side wall as well, and just test fitting all my cuts there, getting a bunch ready. And you can see I have to do that first one in the middle to hide those staple marks. And now I can go to the left and the right, and all of our spacing will be consistent. And once again, I have that middle bracing in the wall so that I have 3 points of contact with the nailer. Because all of these boards, sometimes they'll have a bit of a bow or a twist in them. And it's important for the overall look to be nice and consistent like that, to be able to have somewhere that I can nail the top with the spacer, the middle with the spacer, and the bottom with the spacer, so that the finished board is nice and straight. So now I'm going ahead and getting some scrap pieces of the 1x2 slats nailed into the top and bottom nice and level. And this little section here is what is going to accept our aluminum track for the LED lighting. So this has to go on here, and then you'll see how the lighting will go on to this little track here. Right, so that's just gonna sit inside that channel right there. And you can see the clip, this clip just screws into the wood, and then the channel clips into this clip. So you can see, and these were just off of Amazon. These are readily available, and that has the nice light diffuser that slides into the channel, and that hides all of the dots of the LEDs. And then all of this will be concealed by a piece of 1x4 trim, which is at the end of the video. You'll see how we install that to give a nice finished product to this acoustic wall. So just getting that aluminum track screwed in along the top and bottom. And once we have this track put in, then I can start sticking on the LED lights as I'm doing right now. Because the excess lighting will be tucked in behind the wall, and I just used electrical tape to mask off where we don't want any of the light strip shining like behind the fabric. We just want this light strip obviously on the top and bottom channel that we built here. So you can see I'm just getting all of the excess tucked back into the wall, covering up the excess LED with the electrical tape there. And then once that's all in, then I can finish those slats. Then I can add the rest of the light track and then the rest of the aluminum bar, and can stick on the final little section there of the lighting and tucked into the wall. So you can see with all of that pre-planning, it's super important so that we have access, we have enough of a channel, we have space behind the wall where we can actually tuck these lights in and all of the electrical distribution how we want it to get this nice final product, right? So you can see the only things that are exposed now are the edge sides of these walls, which will all get finished up with finishing trim to achieve our really nice final product there. So this is just the lights without the trim finalized, but just so you can get an idea of how these acoustic walls look. The client was super happy with how this all turned out, and continue watching to see how it all comes together with the trim. So now I'm getting started on the ceiling clouds for the control room here. We're just doing 3 of our standard 2-inch thick acoustic panels, which we'll be mounting as clouds. And I just use the same 2x2 that I'm using for the framing of the walls and getting them all lined up here and screwed together. I'm using 3-inch construction screws. You can see I have lots of videos of how to build these on my channel. So just getting these assembled before we get started on the routering. So here we have the router set up with our 45-degree chamfer bit, and gonna put that nice 45-degree beveled edge on these clouds that we are known for. And we do our first pass, gets rid of all of the bulk of the wood, and then the second pass just makes sure we have a nice consistent 45-degree bevel on there. So just 2 passes on every single edge of these frames, and 3 frames will make up our 4-foot by 6-foot cloud once we mount them all together. So you can see the nice profile that leaves on these frames here with that chamfer bit. And I'm just gonna go over with my sander and just make sure everything is nice and smooth to the touch, so that way when we upholster with our fabric, none of the fabric gets caught and there are no weird bumps or anything in the panel once it's upholstered. So we're sanding with 120 here, and once it's smooth, then it's ready for upholstery. So just doing the rear upholstery, and the client decided on a white fabric from our supplier. Now this fabric was a little bit thinner, so we had to upholster in the black first, so that you wouldn't see the frame or you wouldn't see the acoustic insulation through the white fabric. So we upholstered both sides in black first and then wrapped with the white. So once the rear upholstery is on, I can add the acoustic insulation, and this is the same insulation that's in the walls. This is Rockwool Comfort Board 80. This is what's readily available to us here in Canada, in the Toronto area. For you, it may be different depending on where you are in the world, but the principles are the same. So here we are applying the fabric to the front side of the panel, and this is just the black fabric as the base layer, and then we can lay out our white fabric here. So I just laid out the black fabric on the floor just to make sure that the white fabric doesn't get dirty. And you can see I'm wearing gloves there. Anytime we do white or light colored panels, it's always important that we keep them super clean. And there they are, they're all ready, and they're ready to be, to add the hardware, the screw hooks, and then we're ready to add the hardware into the ceiling. So these are just screw hooks. I believe they are 2 1/4 inch screw hooks, and I mount them 3 inches in from both sides. Just to give a consistent measurement, so that when we apply those measurements to the ceiling, everything lines up correctly. Now here we're just adding the fabric to the vocal booth, getting the vocal booth ready to add the slats. And for that front wall of the vocal booth here, you can see I'm just making little boxes out of the framing wood to mount around our conduits, because when I mount these slats, when the slat meets up to the conduit, I have to cut it, right? And if I cut that slat, I need something to nail that slat into where it terminates, right? So I'm just making little framing boxes to go around the conduits there, and I'm making my channel for the lighting, for the light outlet, for the power outlet rather, which is gonna run up to the ceiling to distribute power for the fiber optic light in the ceiling cloud that we're gonna do in this vocal booth. That will be in part 2. So you can see I'm just getting that extension cord to be able to run all the way to the ceiling. And there it is, all insulated. You can see those little framing boxes around where the conduit is. And now this wall is ready for fabric. Just getting the fabric on this wall and just making sure that that extension cord is not caught on anything, has nice distribution to the ceiling, and just cutting out the sections of the fabric where the conduit is coming out of the wall. And just trimming off the excess. Now we're getting started on the mounting for these ceiling clouds. So using the laser, making sure that we are getting our measurements correct at this stage. Nothing would suck more than getting this crooked or messing this up at this stage, this deep into the build. So we always make sure to measure twice, 3 times if we have to, really align that laser and make sure that everything is lined up nice and consistent. It's very important for our final product there. You can see we just hung our chain from those screw hooks there. And this is just our drywall anchors going into the ceiling there, accepting the screw hook and the chains. And each of these anchors are rated at 45 pounds. Of course, that isn't like vertical strength, but with 4 of them and our panels weighing about 20 pounds each, is more than enough to support each of these panels. So getting the front ones in as well, and now we're ready to swing these up and then adjust to our final angles and our final height. And you can just adjust by what link of chain is attached to the screw hooks. And this is just a rough setup for now. We will be in part 2, we'll be finalizing that setup once we get the client's desk in there. And now I'm just adding these slats to the vocal booth. We had to order another batch of wood and do more staining and sanding and clear coat, but it was all worth it with how this all turned out. Super, super excited with how this is coming together, this build. And it's really cool to showcase this custom work that we're able to do here. And it's just very cool to get to work on this kind of thing with clients. It's very rewarding. And here is getting the framing, the last bits of framing ready for the bass trap. So you can see I had to add that 45-degree bevel cut on the framing lumber there, so that way it meets the top and bottom wall at an angle. And then when we add our trim, the trim will also be cut on a 45 so that it butts up very nicely with the bottom of the bulkhead and the top of the ceiling with no gaps. Now I'm just adding in some insulation here before we begin with the upholstery. And I'm getting the trim stained and clear coated as well, because once we get that bass trap upholstered, then it'll be ready for the trim. So this is just one long 14-foot section. It's nice to do it in a seamless section here with the fabric. So just getting it all stapled in. And this also hides all the last bit of wiring that was exposed. So just adding the clear coat to the trim now. And once that's dry, we can cut that on our table saw to give it that nice 45-degree angle. And the client wanted to do this pillar here in the acoustic slats as well. Now, rather than insulating this pillar, it would have added too much space on each side of the pillar. We decided to just wrap it in the fabric to give it the same look as the walls, and then add the acoustic slats on top, the wood slats on top. Now, right here, I'm adding the 1x4 trim. You can see how that trim covers the lighting there. And now I'm adding the 1x4 trim into the vocal booth. Since this vocal booth does not have the LED lighting, I can just apply the 1x4 directly onto the slats. I don't have to worry about that other piece of 1x2 lighting channel. And I'm just making the notch for that extension cord in the top there before I nail that in. And then the vocal booth trim is complete. The only thing that's left for the vocal booth now is the fiber optic ceiling cloud, and then mounting the monitors and getting all of his microphone cables run there. So this is the last piece of trim for the vocal booth. I'm just getting the notch for the baseboard cut out here, and you'll see how this butts up against the existing baseboard really nicely for a nice final product. And at the very end, when we do our final touch-ups with this client, we'll go ahead and just do some caulking at anywhere that our trim meets the wall or the baseboard. You can see we have our nice final product there. All of our trim nicely put together there, and a nice final product. So now we're just adding these slats to the column. You can see the nice look that this provides. Really ties together this wall, and this whole section of the studio is going to act as a backdrop for this client to be recording drums and other instruments and artists performing. It's just getting that tight section there between the wall. And once again, using our same spacer that we used for the whole build to make sure our gaps are consistent. And then I just cased around the top and bottom as the nice trim in the 1x4. And I just need to touch up those cut ends with the stain and the clear coat. Now we're adding the trim to the left side wall. Same deal, top and bottom, to hide the LED lighting. And this also adds like another layer of light diffusion. It focuses the light just up and down. Looks really nice when the room is dim. More focused look, more ambient lighting look with these pieces of trim on, you can see there. Really cool look in person. And really cool with these LEDs. These LEDs are all set up to connect to the client's smart home system, and everything will be all controlled through the app or through the voice control. You can see how the lighting looks there. Now we're getting started on this trim for the bass trap, and this will really tie together the look of the room. You can see that 45-degree profile that we cut on the table saw onto this trim. And you'll see how this butts up against the top and bottoms now. So just getting that nailed in there. And I had to do it in 2 sections because once again, this is a 14-foot span. So we just did it in 2 equal sections. And you can see that with that 45-degree cut and just a small notch there for the lighting, for the cord. That's all it takes. And then we have a nice finished continuous piece of trim there. And just adding in a small top and bottom piece to case that in. Now we can get started on our final pieces of trim for these walls. This is just to be an end cap on both sides of the walls. And then there will be a 1x4 piece that goes on top to tie off where that bulkhead meets the wall and goes the span of both walls. So you can see I have to do my notches for where the controllers are for the LED systems. And then this piece of side cap trim will provide a nice spot for us to stick that controller in its final place. Right, so getting this all mocked up first before I stain it and clear coat it, just like the rest of them. You can see how we're adding in that top piece of trim and needed to be notched out there for the cable. But once that's all put in, and we'll do some last little caulking at the very end with the client in part 2, and that will complete the look of these acoustic walls. So you can see just getting those controllers stuck on. They come with 3M double-sided tape, so I can just stick them right onto that end cap trim. And just repeating the same process on the left side wall. Getting all the end cap trims in there, and there's a little test. I muted the audio for copyright reasons, but this is all on the music reactive mode. There's a nice picture of the finished wall. Please check out my website, soundheadquarters.com. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this long form format. It's really cool to be able to show you guys in detail everything that we do for these big builds. And stay tuned for part 2, where we'll be completing this build, the fiber optic ceiling cloud, some panels for the front wall. Stay tuned. Peace out. Thanks, it's Daniel.